The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Colonel Sarah Martinez sat alone in her quarters, her hands trembling slightly as she held the familiar weight of her M24 sniper rifle. The weapon had been her constant companion for 15 years, through countless missions across 3 different continents. Today, however, something felt different. The weight seemed heavier, the metal colder against her weathered palms. Sarah had always been known as the Ice Queen among her subordinates. Never a crack in her armor, never a moment of weakness displayed to the world. She commanded respect through her unwavering composure and legendary marksmanship skills that had earned her the nickname Deadeye during her early years in the field. But behind closed doors, away from the watchful eyes of her soldiers, the pressure was finally taking its toll. The base had been under increasing tension for months. Budget cuts meant fewer resources, higher expectations, and more dangerous missions with skeleton crews. Sarah found herself making impossible decisions daily, sending young soldiers into harm's way while knowing she couldn't provide them with adequate backup or equipment. Each choice weighed on her conscience like stones in her chest. As she began the familiar ritual of cleaning her rifle, muscle memory took over. Her hands moved with practiced precision, disassembling each component with the same care a pianist might show their instrument. The methodical process had always been therapeutic, a way to clear her mind and center her thoughts. Strip, clean, oil, reassemble. Each step was a meditation, each movement a prayer for the safety of her team. The cleaning cloth moved in steady circles across the barrel, removing every trace of carbon buildup from their last training exercise. Sarah's mind wandered to Lieutenant Johnson, barely 22 years old, who reminded her so much of her younger brother. She thought about Sergeant Williams, a mother of 2 who had volunteered for the next reconnaissance mission despite the obvious dangers. These weren't just soldiers under her command. They were people with families, dreams, and futures that depended on her leadership. Sarah's reflection was interrupted by a knock at her door. She quickly composed herself, sliding the rifle components behind a folder on her desk. Her public mask slipped back into place effortlessly, years of practice making the transformation seamless. She called for whoever was outside to enter, her voice steady and authoritative despite the turmoil churning inside her chest. A young private stepped inside, saluting crisply before delivering a message about the afternoon briefing. Sarah acknowledged the information with a nod, maintaining her professional demeanor until the soldier left. Once alone again, she returned to her rifle, but now her movements were more urgent, almost desperate. The cleaning had become less about maintenance and more about maintaining her sanity. The weight of command had never felt heavier than it did in that moment. Every decision she made could mean the difference between life and death for the men and women who trusted her with their lives. The responsibility was crushing, yet she knew she couldn't show weakness. Her soldiers needed her to be strong, to be the unshakable leader they believed her to be. As she continued cleaning each component with meticulous care, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. In the privacy of her quarters, with only the morning light as witness, she acknowledged the fear that had been growing inside her. Not fear of the enemy or of death, but fear of making the wrong choice, of failing the people who depended on her. The rifle in her hands represented both her greatest strength and her heaviest burden. The cleaning ritual continued, each stroke of the cloth a silent promise to her soldiers that she would do everything in her power to bring them home safely. The M24 gleamed under the fluorescent lights, every surface spotless and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Sarah knew that in a few hours she would need to stand before her team with confidence and authority, projecting the strength they needed to see. But for now, in these quiet moments, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her responsibility. The afternoon briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as Sarah's team assembled around the large oak table. Maps covered every available surface, marked with red pins indicating hostile territories and blue ones showing friendly positions. The mission parameters had just been delivered from headquarters, and Sarah could feel the familiar knot forming in her stomach as she reviewed the details. Operation Sandstorm required her team to establish overwatch positions in a valley known for insurgent activity. Intelligence reports suggested a high-value target would be moving through the area within the next 48 hours, but the information was sketchy at best. Sarah had led similar missions dozens of times, but something about this one felt wrong. The timeline was too rushed, the intel too vague, and the exit strategy too dependent on variables beyond their control. As she stood before her assembled soldiers, Sarah noticed the mix of excitement and apprehension in their faces. Some were veterans who had served with her for years, their expressions stoic and professional. Others were newer recruits, eager to prove themselves but lacking the experience to fully understand the dangers they faced. Each face represented a family back home, people who were counting on her to make the right decisions. Lieutenant Johnson raised his hand, asking about the backup extraction plan. Sarah appreciated his attention to detail, but the truth was that backup would be limited. The brass had made it clear that resources were stretched thin, and this mission was considered low priority despite its obvious risks. She found herself giving answers that sounded confident while internally questioning whether she was sending her people into an impossible situation. Sergeant Williams studied the topographical maps with the intensity of someone who understood that knowledge could mean survival. She traced potential sniper positions with her finger, asking practical questions about sight lines and escape routes. Sarah watched her and felt a surge of both pride and protective instinct. Williams was one of her best soldiers, but she was also a mother whose children needed her to come home. The technical specifications of the mission were straightforward enough. They would deploy at dawn, establish 3 overwatch positions on the ridgeline, and maintain surveillance for up to 72 hours. Sarah would take the primary position with her M24, while the others would provide support and security. On paper, it looked routine. In reality, they would be operating in territory where the enemy knew every rock and shadow. As the briefing concluded, Sarah dismissed her team with instructions to prepare their gear and get some rest. She watched them file out of the room, their conversations already turning to equipment checks and tactical considerations. Their trust in her leadership was absolute, and that trust felt like both an honor and a crushing weight. They believed she would keep them safe, and she desperately wanted to live up to that faith. Alone in the briefing room, Sarah remained standing at the head of the table, staring at the maps that would dictate their next few days. She traced the planned route with her finger, identifying potential problems and contingencies. The valley they would be watching was beautiful in satellite photos, with rolling hills and scattered vegetation that provided natural camouflage. It was also a perfect killing ground for anyone who knew how to use the terrain. The weight of command meant making decisions with incomplete information and living with the consequences. Sarah had learned long ago that hesitation could be more dangerous than bold action, but this mission felt different. The political pressure from headquarters was obvious, the timeline unrealistic, and the intelligence questionable. Yet refusing the mission wasn't an option. Her soldiers deserved a leader who would find a way to complete the objective and bring everyone home. Sarah's mind wandered to her own training. Years ago, when she first learned to handle the M24, her instructor had taught her that a sniper's greatest weapon wasn't the rifle but patience and discipline, the ability to wait for the perfect shot, to remain calm under pressure, and to make split-second decisions that could change everything. Those lessons had served her well throughout her career. But command brought different challenges. The evening sun was setting outside the briefing room windows, casting long shadows across the maps and documents. Sarah knew she should return to her quarters to finalize her own preparations. But she remained frozen in place, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what lay ahead. Tomorrow she would lead her team into dangerous territory based on questionable intelligence and limited support. The success of the mission and the safety of her soldiers rested entirely on her shoulders. Dawn arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to seep through Sarah's tactical gear as the team loaded into their transport vehicles. The base was still quiet, except for the essential personnel managing their departure. Sarah had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing contingency plans and double-checking her equipment. Her M24 was secured in its case beside her, every component cleaned and calibrated to perfection. The drive to the deployment zone took 3 hours through increasingly hostile territory. Sarah sat in the lead vehicle, watching the landscape change from the familiar safety of the base perimeter to the uncertain danger of the operational area. Her team maintained radio silence according to protocol, but she could sense their alertness increasing with each mile. These were experienced soldiers who understood that their safety depended on constant vigilance. Lieutenant Johnson was driving with steady hands, despite his relative inexperience in this particular region. Sarah had chosen him for his cool head under pressure and his exceptional technical skills. Beside him, Corporal Davidson monitored the radio frequencies, listening for any signs of enemy activity in the area. Their intelligence briefings had mentioned increased chatter in recent days, but nothing specific enough to change their mission parameters. Sergeant Williams rode in the second vehicle with the rest of the team, her eyes constantly scanning the roadside for potential threats. Sarah could see her in the side mirror, alert and focused, every inch the professional soldier. Williams had requested this assignment despite having the option to remain at base with her administrative duties. She claimed she needed the field experience, but Sarah suspected she simply didn't want to send others into danger while remaining safe herself. The convoy reached the designated drop-off point, just as the morning sun began burning off the valley mist. The location was a dirt road intersection that provided access to several hiking trails leading up into the hills. From here, they would proceed on foot to their observation positions, carrying everything they needed for 3 days of surveillance. The weight of their packs was substantial, but each item had been carefully selected for its necessity. Sarah gathered her team for a final equipment check before they moved out. Radios were tested, weapons inspected, and emergency procedures reviewed one last time. She looked into each soldier's face, seeing the determination and trust that had made this unit so effective over the years. They were counting on her leadership to navigate whatever challenges awaited them in the hills ahead. The hike to their positions began along a well-worn trail that quickly branched off into rougher terrain. Sarah took point, using her experience to select the safest route while maintaining their timeline. The ground was rocky and uneven, requiring careful attention to avoid twisted ankles or equipment damage. Behind her, the team moved with practiced silence, their movements coordinated through years of training together. As they climbed higher into the hills, Sarah's mind focused on the tactical situation ahead. The valley they would be watching stretched out below them, a natural corridor that insurgent forces often use to move supplies and personnel. Their mission was to identify and track any significant enemy movement, particularly the high-value target mentioned in their briefing. Success would require patience, precision, and more than a little luck. The first observation position was reached after 2 hours of steady climbing. Sarah selected a rocky outcrop that provided excellent sightlines across the valley, while offering natural camouflage and cover. She began setting up her M24, adjusting the bipod legs and checking the scope alignment. The familiar weight of the rifle was comforting, a reminder of countless successful missions and the skills that had earned her reputation. Lieutenant Johnson and Corporal Davidson continued to the secondary position, another 1,000 meters along the ridgeline. Their role would be to provide overlapping coverage and serve as backup communication relay if needed. Sarah watched them disappear among the rocks and scrub brush, confident in their ability to establish an effective observation post. Sergeant Williams led the remaining team members to establish the third position, which would serve as both observation point and security for their withdrawal route. Sarah trusted Williams completely to handle the tactical setup, knowing she would position her people for maximum effectiveness while maintaining operational security. The 3 positions formed a triangle of surveillance that would be difficult for enemy forces to avoid or eliminate. As Sarah settled into her position behind the M24, she felt the familiar calm that came with assuming her role as the team's primary sniper. The scope revealed every detail of the valley below, from individual rocks to the shadows cast by scattered trees. This was where her years of training and experience would matter most, where her ability to remain patient and alert could mean the difference between mission success and disaster. 6 hours into their surveillance, Sarah's eyes burned from the constant strain of watching the valley through her scope. The sun had reached its peak, creating heat distortions that made accurate observation challenging. Her position among the rocks provided good cover but little comfort, and she could feel the beginning aches of maintaining the same posture for hours. This was the unglamorous reality of sniper work that movies never showed. The radio crackled softly in her earpiece as Lieutenant Johnson reported from the secondary position. No movement detected, all quiet on his sector. Sergeant Williams checked in moments later with the same report. The valley remained empty except for the occasional bird or small animal moving through the scrub brush. Sarah began to wonder if their intelligence had been accurate, or if they were watching an empty stage while the real action happened elsewhere. Around midday, Sarah's attention was drawn to movement near the valley's eastern approach. Through her scope, she could make out 3 figures moving carefully along what appeared to be a game trail. They were too far away to identify clearly, but their movement pattern suggested military training. Sarah adjusted her scope's magnification and felt her pulse quicken as the figures came into sharper focus. The lead figure carried what looked like an AK-47 variant, while the others had equipment packs that could contain anything from medical supplies to explosives. Their clothing was civilian, but their tactical awareness and formation suggested these weren't local farmers or herders. Sarah keyed her radio quietly, alerting her team to the potential contact while maintaining her observation. As the three figures moved deeper into the valley, Sarah tracked them through her scope with practiced precision. Her crosshairs followed their movement automatically, muscle memory from thousands of hours of training keeping the sight picture steady despite her elevated heart rate. These could be the advanced scouts for a larger group, or they might be the primary target themselves. Without better intelligence, she could only watch and report. Lieutenant Johnson's voice came through her earpiece, confirming he had visual contact on the same group from his position. His angle provided a different perspective that filled in details Sarah couldn't see from her location. The figures were definitely armed and moving with purpose toward a specific destination deeper in the valley. Sarah made mental notes of their route, speed, and behavior patterns for her after-action report. The waiting game continued as the three figures established what appeared to be a temporary observation post of their own on the valley floor. Sarah realized with growing concern that they might be conducting counter-surveillance, looking for exactly the kind of overwatch positions her team occupied. The hunters had become the hunted, and the tactical situation was becoming more complex by the minute. Sergeant Williams reported suspicious movement from her position as well, indicating that additional personnel might be entering the valley from multiple directions. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with escalating situations. What had been planned as a routine surveillance mission was developing into something much more dangerous. Her team was outnumbered and potentially surrounded by hostile forces. The afternoon heat was becoming oppressive, and Sarah could feel sweat beading on her forehead, despite her efforts to remain hydrated and cool. The rocks around her position absorbed and radiated heat like an oven, making concentration difficult. She forced herself to maintain focus, knowing that a moment's inattention could be fatal for her entire team. Through her scope, Sarah watched as the three figures began unpacking equipment that looked suspiciously like communication gear. If they were establishing a command post, it meant more personnel would likely be arriving soon. Sarah began calculating distances and wind conditions, preparing for the possibility that she might need to engage targets to protect her team's position or facilitate their withdrawal. The tactical situation deteriorated further when Corporal Davidson reported radio interference suggesting enemy jamming. Equipment was being deployed. Sarah realized they were dealing with a sophisticated opponent who had planned this operation carefully. Her team's communication and coordination advantages were being systematically eliminated, leaving them vulnerable and isolated. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Sarah made the difficult decision to prepare for potential combat engagement. She adjusted her rifle's position slightly, ensuring optimal sight lines to the most likely target areas. Her breathing became more controlled, and her mind shifted into the focused state that had made her legendary among military snipers. The time for passive observation was ending. The weight of command pressed heavily on Sarah's shoulders as she considered her options. Engaging the enemy would reveal their position, but might be necessary to protect her team. Attempting withdrawal might save lives but could compromise the mission and intelligence gathering. Every choice carried consequences that would ripple far beyond this single operation, affecting not just her soldiers but potentially future missions and lives. The moment Sarah had been dreading arrived as the sun cast longer shadows across the valley floor. Through her scope, she watched as additional figures emerged from concealed positions, revealing that her team had been walking into a carefully planned trap. The enemy had known about their mission and had positioned forces to surround and eliminate them. Sarah's heart raced as she counted at least 12 hostiles moving with military precision toward her team's positions. Lieutenant Johnson's urgent whisper came through her earpiece, reporting that his position was being flanked by at least 4 armed individuals moving up the ridgeline. The young officer's voice remained steady despite the obvious danger, but Sarah could hear the tension underneath his professional demeanor. Corporal Davidson confirmed visual contact on the flanking movement, estimating they had perhaps 10 minutes before their position would be compromised. Sergeant Williams faced an even more immediate threat, as enemy forces approached her position from two directions simultaneously. Her team was in danger of being overrun, and Sarah knew that decisive action was required to prevent a catastrophic loss of life. The weight of her M24 felt different now, no longer just a precision instrument but a lifeline for her soldiers who trusted her to protect them. Sarah's training took over as she transitioned from observer to active combatant. Her breathing slowed and deepened, her heart rate actually decreasing as she entered the focused state that had made her famous throughout the military. The crosshairs in her scope settled on the lead figure approaching Johnson's position, a bearded man carrying what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher that could devastate her team's defensive positions. The distance was approximately 800 meters, well within Sarah's effective range but challenging due to the wind conditions and heat distortion from the valley floor. She made minute adjustments to her scope, compensating for the environmental factors that could throw off her shot. The margin for error was 0. A miss would alert the entire enemy force to her position, while failing to neutralize the immediate threat to her team. Sarah's finger found the trigger as she controlled her breathing, waiting for the perfect moment between heartbeats when her natural body movement would be minimal. The target moved steadily along a predictable path, unaware that death was tracking him through a high-powered scope. Sarah felt the familiar calm that came with absolute focus, the world narrowing to nothing but the sight picture and the gentle pressure of her finger on the trigger. The M24 spoke with authority, its sharp crack echoing across the valley as the .308 round found its target with devastating accuracy. The enemy leader dropped instantly, his weapon clattering uselessly among the rocks. Sarah was already working the bolt action, chambering another round while scanning for her next target. The element of surprise was gone, but she had bought her team precious time to reposition and respond. Chaos erupted in the valley as the enemy forces realized they were under fire from a skilled marksman. Sarah watched through her scope as they scattered for cover, their coordinated advance dissolving into confused movement. She selected her next target, an individual who appeared to be trying to establish communication with other elements of the enemy force. Another squeeze of the trigger, another precise shot that eliminated a threat to her team's survival. "Lieutenant?" Johnson's voice came through the radio with reports of successful defensive positioning as the enemy flanking movement faltered without their leader. Sarah's intervention had broken up the coordinated attack, giving her soldiers the opportunity to establish proper defensive positions and return effective fire. The tactical situation was still dangerous, but no longer hopeless. Sergeant Williams reported that her position was holding against the enemy advance, with her team making good use of cover and superior training to keep the hostiles at bay. Sarah continued providing precision fire support, each shot carefully planned to maximize its impact on enemy morale and coordination. Her reputation as Deadeye was being proven once again under the most challenging circumstances. The enemy forces began a tactical withdrawal after losing several key personnel to Sarah's accurate fire. She tracked their movement through her scope, noting their routes and numbers for the intelligence report that would follow this engagement. The immediate threat to her team was diminishing, but Sarah knew they needed to evacuate the area quickly before enemy reinforcements could arrive. As the valley grew quiet except for the distant sounds of the retreating enemy force, Sarah felt the enormous weight of responsibility beginning to lift from her shoulders. Her team was alive and intact thanks to her marksmanship skills and decisive leadership. The mission had evolved far beyond its original parameters, but they had successfully defended themselves and gathered valuable intelligence about enemy operations in the region. Sarah began the process of preparing for withdrawal, coordinating with her team leaders to ensure they could exit the area safely while avoiding any remaining enemy presence. Her M24 had performed flawlessly under pressure, and her own skills had proven themselves when her soldiers' lives depended on them. The weapon that had been cleaned so carefully that morning had delivered the precision and reliability that saved her team from disaster. The extraction from the valley required every bit of tactical skill Sarah's team possessed as they moved through potentially hostile territory toward their pickup point. The enemy withdrawal had been tactical rather than complete, and Sarah knew that additional forces could be positioning for another attack. Her team moved in coordinated bounds, each soldier covering the others as they descended from their observation positions toward the rendezvous location. Lieutenant Johnson had proven himself during the engagement, maintaining composure under fire and effectively coordinating his section's defensive response. Sarah watched him lead his people with growing confidence, recognizing the leadership qualities that would serve him well in future operations. His radio discipline had been excellent throughout the crisis, providing clear and accurate reports that enabled Sarah to direct her fire support effectively. Sergeant Williams brought up the rear guard, ensuring that no enemy forces could pursue them without being detected. Her experience showed in the way she positioned her people and managed their movement through the difficult terrain. Sarah felt a surge of pride watching Williams work, knowing that soldiers like her were the backbone of military effectiveness. The mother of two had risked her life to protect her teammates without hesitation. The weight of Sarah's M24 felt different as she carried it down the mountainside. The rifle had performed exactly as designed when her team's survival depended on its accuracy and reliability. Each shot had been placed with surgical precision, neutralizing threats while minimizing the risk to her own soldiers. The weapon was more than just equipment. It was an extension of her will and skill, a tool that had saved lives through expert application. Communication with headquarters remained sporadic due to the enemy jamming equipment, but Sarah managed to establish brief contact to report their status and request immediate extraction. The response confirmed that support aircraft were already en route, but the team would need to reach the pickup zone within the next 2 hours to avoid extended exposure to enemy retaliation. Time was critical, and every minute of delay increased their risk. As they moved through a narrow canyon that provided concealment but limited escape routes, Sarah's tactical instincts warned her of potential ambush sites. She deployed her team in formation that would allow them to respond effectively to contact from any direction while maintaining their movement toward safety. The lessons learned from years of combat experience guided every decision as she balanced speed against security. Corporal Davidson's technical expertise proved invaluable as he managed to defeat some of the enemy jamming efforts, restoring partial communication capability. His quiet competence had been a constant throughout the mission, providing the technical support that modern military operations required. Sarah made mental notes to ensure his contributions were properly recognized in her after-action report. The sound of approaching aircraft provided enormous relief as Sarah's team reached the designated landing zone. The helicopter pilots had navigated hostile airspace to reach them, demonstrating the commitment to bringing every soldier home that defined military culture. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of gratitude and responsibility as she prepared to load her team aboard the extraction aircraft. As the helicopter lifted off from the valley floor, Sarah watched the terrain disappear below them through the aircraft's window. The mission had evolved far beyond its original scope, but her team had adapted and overcome every challenge through training, teamwork, and superior leadership. The intelligence they had gathered about enemy capabilities and intentions would prove valuable for future operations in the region. The flight back to base gave Sarah time to process the events of the past day and consider their implications. Her marksmanship skills had been tested under the most demanding circumstances and had not been found wanting. More importantly, her leadership had enabled her team to survive and succeed when faced with overwhelming odds. The weight of command that had felt so crushing that morning now felt manageable again. Lieutenant Johnson approached Sarah during the flight to express his gratitude for her fire support and leadership during the engagement. His words carried genuine respect and appreciation, but Sarah knew the real measure of success was that every member of their team was returning home alive. Young officers like Johnson represented the future of military leadership, and missions like this one provided the experience they would need to lead others effectively. Sergeant Williams caught Sarah's eye and nodded with the understanding that passes between experienced soldiers who have shared combat. No words were necessary to communicate the mutual respect and trust that had enabled their successful extraction. Williams had demonstrated once again why she was considered one of the finest non-commissioned officers in the unit, leading by example under the most challenging circumstances. As the base came into view ahead of them, Sarah began thinking about the debriefing process and the reports that would need to be written. The mission had provided valuable lessons about enemy capabilities and tactics that would need to be shared with other units operating in the region. Her team's experience could help save lives in future operations if the lessons learned were properly documented and disseminated. Back in her quarters that evening, Sarah sat once again with her M24, but this time the cleaning ritual held a different meaning. The rifle had proven itself in combat, delivering the accuracy and reliability that had saved her team's lives. Each component she disassembled and cleaned carried the weight of successful shots that had neutralized threats and protected her soldiers. The weapon deserved the careful attention she gave it, having earned its place as a trusted partner in the most dangerous situations. The base had buzzed with activity, following their return as intelligence analysts processed the information gathered during the mission. Sarah's detailed debriefing had provided crucial insights into enemy tactics and capabilities that would influence future operations. The ambush they had encountered suggested a level of sophistication and planning that exceeded previous intelligence estimates, making their survival and successful intelligence gathering even more significant. Lieutenant Johnson had submitted his own report praising Sarah's leadership and marksmanship, noting that her precision fire support had been the decisive factor in their successful defense and extraction. Reading his account, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and humility. The young officer's words captured the technical aspects of her shooting, but couldn't convey the emotional weight of making split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died. Sergeant Williams had also written a comprehensive account of the mission, focusing on the tactical lessons learned and recommendations for future operations. Her professional analysis demonstrated the depth of experience and tactical understanding that made her such an effective leader. Sarah appreciated Williams' attention to detail and her commitment to ensuring that their hard-won knowledge would benefit other soldiers facing similar challenges. The cleaning cloth moved methodically across the rifle's barrel as Sarah reflected on the day's events. Every shot she had fired had been necessary and precisely placed, but taking human life was never something to celebrate. Her marksmanship skills were tools for protecting the innocent and defending her soldiers, not sources of personal pride or glory. The weight of those decisions would stay with her long after the mission reports were filed and forgotten. A knock at her door interrupted Sarah's contemplation, and she looked up to see the base commander entering her quarters. Colonel Richards had come to personally debrief her on the mission and discuss the implications of the intelligence they had gathered. His presence indicated the significance that higher headquarters placed on their operation and its results. Colonel Richards listened intently as Sarah provided additional details about the enemy's capabilities and organization. Her observations during the engagement had revealed tactical patterns and equipment that suggested foreign training and support for the insurgent forces. This information would need to be forwarded to intelligence agencies for further analysis and action. The conversation turned to Sarah's team and their performance during the crisis. Colonel Richards expressed his intention to recommend several team members for commendations, including Lieutenant Johnson for his leadership under fire and Sergeant Williams for her tactical expertise and courage. Sarah appreciated his recognition of her soldiers' contributions, knowing that their efforts deserved formal acknowledgement. As Colonel Richards prepared to leave, he paused to comment on Sarah's own performance during the mission. Her marksmanship and leadership had prevented what could have been a significant loss of life and intelligence disaster. The reputation she had earned as Deadeye had been proven once again under the most challenging circumstances, adding another chapter to a distinguished career. Alone again with her rifle, Sarah completed the cleaning process with the same meticulous care she had shown that morning. The weapon was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, its components gleaming under the fluorescent lights of her quarters. More importantly, her team had survived their encounter with a sophisticated enemy and returned with valuable intelligence that would help protect other soldiers. The weight of command would always be present, Sarah realized, but missions like this one reminded her why she had chosen military service. Her skills and leadership could make a real difference in protecting the people who depended on her. The M24 in her hands was more than just a precision instrument. It was a symbol of her commitment to bringing every soldier home safely. As she secured the rifle in its case for the night, Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction that had been missing for months. The crushing pressure she had felt that morning had been replaced by renewed confidence in her abilities and purpose. Her team trusted her leadership, her skills had proven themselves under fire, and she had once again demonstrated that the nickname Deadeye was well-deserved. The base grew quiet around her as Sarah prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities. But tonight she could rest with the knowledge that when her soldiers' lives had depended on her marksmanship and leadership, she had not failed them. The M24 lay cleaned and ready in its case, waiting for the next time her country and her team would need the precision and reliability that defined her legacy.